Alright, now before we start really building the rest of the Natives project, let's just quickly review the three basic principles of responsive design. I'm pretty sure that many of you are already familiar with these, but I want to make 100% sure that we're all on the same page before diving deep into this project. So the first, let's say, ingredient for responsive design is to use fluid grids and layouts. And what this means is that we use percentages rather than pixels for all layout related length, and especially width. We do this, of course, in order to allow the content to easily adapt to the current viewport that the user is using to browse the website. The next ingredient are flexible and responsive images. It's necessary to mention this aspect because images behave a bit different than text content, because they do not scale automatically as we change the viewport, and so we need to ensure that they also adapt nicely to the current viewport. Usually we make images flexible by defining their dimensions in percentages, rather than fixed units like pixels. Plus, images usually make up the biggest part of our website's size in terms of megabytes, and so we should optimize the images for different width, which is something we're going to do later when we talk deeper about responsive images. Alright, and the last piece of the puzzle, because fluid grids and layouts and flexible images alone aren't enough, are media queries, which allow us to change styles on certain viewport width, which are called breakpoints. So basically, media queries allow developers to create different versions of a website for different types of devices, okay? Now, moving on and taking a closer look at the first aspect that we talked about, so fluid grids and layouts. In modern web design, there are currently three major ways of laying out a web page or app. So, for a long time, we have been using float-based layouts, where we simply put a bunch of boxes side by side using floats. Simple as that. This method is still being used in 2017, and it's still how I personally lay out my designs today. And that's because the alternatives are still not 100% supported by all browsers. So about these modern alternatives, I'm talking about Flexbox and the even more modern CSS Grid technology. And you probably heard of these, right? So while Flexbox offers an amazing way of laying out elements in a one-dimensional row, CSS Grid is perfect for creating the overall layout of a page in a fully fledged 2D grid, so a two-dimensional grid. These are great technologies, as I was saying, and they will make our life a lot easier in the future. But as of 2017, I'm not sure we should use them in production. The thing is that the layout is the single most fundamental aspect of our design. And so if a browser does not support a technology like Flexbox or CSS Grid, then that's a major problem and can ruin our entire designs if we choose to only rely on these new technologies, of course. So for all these reasons, we're going to use float layouts for this project, simply because this is still used everywhere and will be used for a long time, and so you need to really know how it works. But since you bought the most advanced CSS course on the market, you will of course also learn Flexbox and CSS Grid. Not in a Natives project though, but in future projects later in the course. So the next project will be about Flexbox, and the third and last project will be with CSS Grid. Now this last project is actually not available right at lunchtime of this course, but if you're watching this by the end of 2017 or so, it will already be there, okay? So moving forward in the future, you will always have to know how to use all of these three layout types, because that's really where CSS is moving right now. For the ones of you who are familiar with JavaScript, this is a bit like the older JavaScript versions and ES6. These days, you really need to know both JavaScript versions, because even with ES6 around by now, you're still going to see lots of the older ES5 around for a long time. Alright, and that's enough for one lecture. See you in a second in the next video. Back to coding.